Hey, hello everyone. I think welcome again to a brand new episode of speaking to the best content marketing leaders across the world. It's a pleasure to have Logan Goldberg over with us here. Logan comes from a very interesting background of having a lot of interest in journalism and writing, eventually making that as a profession, and that too in a very deep B2B side of the world where something like this is less heard of, to be honest, in this case. So Logan, I think with your experiences across hyper growth companies, a small entrepreneurial stint, and now working at Overjet, another hyper growth experience, I would say, right? I think it would be a fun pleasure speaking to you and learning from you.
Well, I don't know if I can live up to that great intro, but I appreciate it, and yeah, very excited for this conversation. And yeah, happy to start with my background. Where do you want to kick off the conversation here?
Yeah, so I think Logan, let's begin knowing Logan as a person first. I always keep it this way. Let's begin Logan as a person, Logan as a professional. But let's start with knowing Logan as a person. Where you grew up, how did you land up over here? You studied at UC Berkeley. How did that interest and entire passion for journalism, writing, eventually transform into profession? So I think would love to know Logan as a person over there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've always been fascinated by great stories. And specifically, I think this question really has captivated a lot of my life, which is what makes a story truly exceptional? What makes a story a world changing idea? Because all of us see so many stories and so many ads, so much content all day. I think there's this stat that the average American sees 5,000 ads every single day. And there's even more content than that that's really battling for our attention. So, the question that really is interesting to me is why do we seek out certain stories, certain ideas, certain content, and ignore everything else, ignore this whole universe of other possibility? So that's been something that really has intrigued me my whole life. I started off as, thinking I was going to be a fiction author. I wrote a very pretentious novel when I was in high school, which makes me cringe every time I see it. I would write sentences that would take up an entire page, and it was very fluffy. Um, and when I went to Berkeley, I had a pretty much 180 shift where I became the editor of the school paper. And the journalistic style of writing is something I really had to learn because it's the opposite of what I've been doing before. It's very matter of fact, it's very concise. And really, it was my first introduction to this battleground that is content, where either you have to say something significant and meaningful and impactful in the first 2 seconds, or I'm gone. I'm out of there. I'm moving on to the next thing. So essentially, the breakthrough moment for me was I wrote a story on the graduation of formerly incarcerated students.
Hmm.
And this story was actually the most widely read story in the history of the Berkeley newspaper. I think we got something like 30,000 clicks on it, and it was on the front page of the print newspaper. And for me, that was a breakthrough in thinking, okay, what did I do here that was successful? Where this hadn't really been my style of writing before, and so I got sort of obsessed with figuring out what in particular about that story was so interesting to people. And I think there's a lot there that I can talk about, but really that started me down this journey that has led me to becoming a marketer and a content creator and really becoming obsessed with this question of how do you get people's attention in a very crowded landscape.
No, super cool. I think, and Logan, I mean, would love to also quickly get a sense around when did you decide about making your passion as your profession, right? I mean, how did that journey grew up? And also, if it would be great for other fellow marketers to understand how do you make it up in the B2B world altogether? Because I'll tell you, on the outset of it, appears like B2B is extremely technical,
Yeah.
unless and people also confuse technical with technological in that case. So people in my understanding, people always fear with the fact of they don't understand technology too well, they're more creative side. Do we enter that space? Not so. How did it pan out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to chew on there. I think, one thing I'll say is I frankly struggle with this idea of turning my passion into a profession. And I think it's important for writers and content creators who are also using those skills professionally to create a little bit of a mental distinction there and say, okay, this is my passion project. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want here. And this is the thing that I really need to perform. And this is, like the specific goal I have for this project at work. So I
Right.
think it's important to keep that distinction if writing and content creation is your passion. That's the first thing I would say. And I think as far as how I got into B2B marketing, frankly, and I think a lot of B2B marketers can relate to this, the status quo is so boring and frankly so bad in B2B marketing the bar is so low that it's really easy if you just apply common sense of content creation to make a huge impact very quickly. And that's not necessarily as much the case in other areas. I think B2C has better figured out the content game. They're still not perfect, but they've better figured out the content game. Whereas I think a lot of B2B startups, especially very technical B2B startups, really haven't figured it out, because in a lot of cases, they're writing very technical content. Like if you look at their blog, it's here's how we created this model, and it's written for engineers in a lot of cases, as opposed to written for their customers. And the sort of overarching philosophy that I think about as far as B2B marketing is, you have to apply this common sense that we have in our personal lives, where everything that we're doing, you're at risk of losing your audience's attention. And I think the way that B2B companies can fix that is applying this common sense that we have in other aspects of our lives, where whenever we're saying anything, it has to be relevant to the audience and has to start with their goals and their needs.
No, super good. And Logan, I've seen a trend in your career, particularly when someone scrolls down your LinkedIn, right? You've always called yourself a content and a communication specialist, right? Now, I was asking this question to a few MBA students the other day, who were trying to enter marketing as a domain, right? And they were passionate about content to an extent. And the question I got from them is, hey, how do we choose between communications and content? And a lot
Mm,
of people confuse communications with copywriting also on
right.
the other front, right? So would love to also dive deeper, because you are an expert, I'm hoping, who has always carried the title of communication in your roles particularly. How are they different? Are they not different? Are they a subset of each other? And also, how does it translate to your day-to-day work job, right? What is the KPIs that you own with communication as a piece? Would be lovely to just educate the audiences with this.
Yeah, I'll start at the highest level, which is I think where pretty much everyone should start when they're beginning their career. Is you have to think beyond my skills and my job title, because especially at a startup, your job title is really just something that you say in an email, right? You
Yeah.
end up doing a little bit of everything. And so I think the mindset that you need to be successful really in any aspect of a startup world, but particularly in marketing, is thinking backwards from what does the business need, right? And at Overjet, for example, what we're trying to be is the biggest, the best, the most premium dental AI company in the world. We want everyone in the world, when they think of the phrase dental AI, which is a very niche phrase, right? When they think of the phrase dental AI, we want the next thing they think of to be Overjet. And getting there, getting to that simple goal is an incredibly, incredibly difficult project, right? It takes years, it takes hundreds of people, probably thousands of people ultimately, if you think about our partners and our customers, right? It's an incredibly difficult challenge. And if I'm thinking about my role as I'm a social media manager, or I'm a content marketing manager, or I'm a PR manager, or whatever the case may be, it's really difficult to connect the dots from just that specific function to this really big picture company goal.
Makes sense. Makes sense, Logan. I think thank you so much. I think this information would be very helpful for other people looking out to start their roles, especially in startups, because those are difficult leaps to take in with no predictability of what happens next. But I think those are also the longer bets that you play around, right? With uh, just one more piece, Logan, I would want to also understand, and if you can kind of explain this in depth about how do you build content conviction across companies, right? And you slightly touch base on that point of, in a sense, that how do you make your budgets come out from your managers and your bosses and the founders particularly. But I've seen there are two kinds of founders in general. I mean, there might be a third kind, but broadly I base it in two facts, right? One, people who have content conviction. Second, people who don't have content conviction. Because
Mm,
content as a piece is a slow burn, right? I mean, it grows slowly, but it
right.
compounds over a period of time. How do you probably convince people across building what I called as a content conviction? By the way, Pepper ideally sells to people who would have content conviction, because otherwise it becomes too difficult to sell. So we always define this term as the content conviction, but love to get a sense from you, Logan.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, and I definitely have experienced that with B2B. I think so many companies, to the earlier point, really just aren't prioritizing content at all, and instead, they're outsourcing, and they have one person who really doesn't understand the company at all, writing blog posts and press releases for no one, right? That no one reads, and content is essentially just kind of checking the box. And really, I think the role of content can be so much more than that. I think when done well, really what marketing is doing is building your brand, and all your brand is just how does the market perceive you, right? The brand is something that lives in the imagination of everyone in the world. And so I think the most important thing the marketing team can do, and the most important thing that content can do, is make sure that people know and trust your brand. And arguably, there's nothing more important for a business to succeed than that. So, I think clearly both of us are convinced that content is important. I think most B2B companies either are not convinced it's important or don't really understand the potential impact.
Very interesting. I think a good methodology to follow is don't get panicked. First of all, it's not that
Mm.
people don't want to spend money. It's just that you have to justify your ROI. I mean, we call it Pepper as ROCC. We call as return on content creation as a metric to judge on this. But I think the first thing I'd say is don't panic. It's not that they don't want to spend. It's just about it. It is like how you do your account based marketing. You got to figure out all the accounts of the stakeholders in the company, and then figure out how do you kind of convince each of them across the board. So
Yeah.
I get the sense, right? uh, Logan, also very interestingly wanting to get a quick sense around the search aspect of things, right? With the frequent movement of Google now not being extremely predictable, if I were to put it that way, on how the entire content led search is going to happen. But broadly, I think Google is convinced itself to say that content is going to play a really really big importance in the entire SEO strategies of the world, right? So I'm just trying to understand the role of SEO and content into a company like an Overjet.
I think, a couple things I'll say. First of all is I joined Overjet in January, and, I joined with somewhat of a nebulous charter in a lot of ways where I'm leading social media for us. I'm leading PR and communications and branding and content marketing. And so, frankly, we're really limited on the amount of bandwidth that we have. And, as that relates to SEO, I think really the opportunity for SEO is with credibility. And so there's so much content out there, right? There's billions and billions of articles and videos and blog posts and everything, right? And so you're trying to win on a pure volume play. I think that's probably an outdated strategy. There's definitely a role for some modern variation of keyword stuffing, but I think ultimately what we have to do in order to separate our content and ultimately our brand is to build credibility. And I think that's especially the case when you look at AI summarizations of content. Right now, when you search for things on Google, you'll often get that AI summary at the top. Also when you're looking, when you're using a service like ChatGPT to get an answer, it'll typically be actually quoting from news article, as I've seen recently. So if you say to GPT, what is dental AI, or what's a good dental AI solution, in a lot of cases it's actually pulling from SEO content, but actually specifically it's pulling from news articles. Because I think when you're looking at those AI models that are summarizing content, they're really going to be focusing not just on volume, but on the credibility of your content.
Great, Logan. I think thanks for sharing those experiences, right? Particularly, another question that comes to my mind is while you said a lot more about how do you exactly kind of plan on getting, say, into a Forbes list, or maybe coming out and making the best kind of content in the world in a niche engine, like in a niche space like a dental AI. It's always about a people, process, and technology that comes into picture, right? So I would say one would love to understand how do you go on building your content teams, particularly what are the kind of people you got in, because I'm pretty sure there are no experts of dental AI in the world that still exist in this case, right? And on the second front, when it comes to the process, when it comes to the core strategy on choosing, do I want to do influencer marketing, do I want to do social, do I want to ride a trend, do I want to take a seasonal thing up, whatever that be, combined with what kind of KPIs do you guys own and the team owns particularly on that. So that would be great to just understand as a stack. Technology I'd want to touch base separately, but this is like an overall thing I wanted to ask.
Yeah, it's interesting. So right now, I don't have a content team. It's a content team of one at Overjet. But when I was at MoveWorks, I led a team of 7 people as
Okay.
part of our content team. And I was really inspired when I was hiring by my first job, actually, where the company essentially just hired people straight out of college, and they were prioritizing folks who didn't have experience in the industry because this was an AI cybersecurity company, and their whole thing was we're reinventing cybersecurity, and we don't want people who have experience in the space because we're doing things totally differently.
Yeah.
And too, I think a certain extent they were doing that to save money, and it's a smart business move on their part. But I think they were onto something to the extent that when you're building a category creating startup and you're doing something that's unprecedented, basically no one in the world, to your point, has experience building a dental AI company. And so
Right.
the question of, right, who do you hire? How do you build a content team? I think again it goes back to this idea of being customer centric and not just focusing on yourself, but focusing on the audience. And so the inwardly focused approach to that would be okay, let's hire folks who have a lot of experience in dental and in dental insurance and who really understand the technical nuances. I think really the most important thing with content is how do we create awesome content? Sounds simple, right? But how
Yeah,
do we create awesome content? And if you look at
and
folks like Mr.
viral too.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And I think when you look at folks like Mr. Beast, for example, who's pretty much on the exact opposite end of the spectrum from a cybersecurity company or a
yeah,
dental company, right? How does this guy whose name is Jimmy, who started making videos when he was 13, how does he build a multi-billion-dollar company to the point where he's not even willing to sell his company for $1 billion, right? How does he create videos that consistently have 400, 500 million views when most B2B companies out there are creating blog posts that get 3 views, right? 5 views. Not
yeah,
500 million, five, right?
yeah.
So what do folks like Mr. Beast know that these massive B2B companies in a lot of cases that are spending a huge amount of money to create content, what does Mr. Beast know that they don't know? And again, going back to the first thing I said, that's my fascination, right? How do you create a great story that people actually care about? And so when you think about hiring, hire people who know how to do that. Hire people who know how to tell great stories, who know how to get attention, who know how to make beautiful content, but impactful content. And then really get curious about the product and the technology. And that's the other thing, right? You can be great at content, but if the content has nothing to do at all with your company and your product, you have the same problem, right? It's the other side of the problem. And so I think really what you have to do is focus on hiring people who, one, have a lot of experience making impactful content, and two, who are curious enough where they're going to understand enough about the technology and the product that makes the content relevant.
Makes sense. Makes sense. No, wonderful. I think this is really helpful. I want to touch base on the technology aspect. See, you've been a part of AI companies all throughout, right? Companies using artificial intelligence to make verticalized use cases, to an extent generative AI now. And I would want to touch base upon how do you use AI maybe in your own content stack
Mhm.
on one front. What are the other tools that you might be using, particularly when it comes to creation of the same content, right, on a day-to-day basis? Would love to get a sense around what's the technology stack of your content marketing team looks like.
One of my favorite things to do is really unleash my creativity when it comes to AI. And so, at Overjet, we created an AI generated song. We create AI generated memes and videos. We did
Yeah.
one social post that was one of my favorites when I just started, which was reimagining George Washington, but with a perfect smile. And the joke was, this is what George Washington would look like if he used Overjet. And so, I
Nice.
think really, going back to the question about the technology stack, I honestly love exploring pretty much every single AI tool out there. My favorites right now is I'll use Midjourney, which I personally think Midjourney V6.1 is pretty mind blowing, the latest version. So I'll use Midjourney to create images, and then I often use those images as the reference image when I create AI generated videos. And I use a tool called Runway to do that. So I'll create an initial reference image with AI in Midjourney, make a video in Runway, and then I use another tool to actually create AI generated music. And so, one fun example is recently we created this video for social media that was, here's a Lego dental clinic, a dental clinic made entirely out of Legos. And you see this like very high resolution, beautiful clinic, right? And you have this like almost Inception style music playing behind it. And the post started with, our entire team has been building this Lego dental clinic for 2 weeks. Just kidding, we made it with AI in 2 seconds. And I think really that's the power of AI. Is it's one thing to have an opinion and to say, AI is the future and everyone needs AI. It's another thing to show, don't tell, and say, look at this thing. Like AI did this immediately. And wouldn't it be cool if this is something that you could use in your business? So really, I think that's the role of AI generated content, is to show, not tell, especially for AI companies, that this technology is here. It's right now. It's not the future. It's already happening.
Hmm. Very interesting. I'd like to see the Lego thing. It's very interesting if that entire piece had been made, because had we made it with motion graphics and 3D rendering, it would have charged a bomb of a cost on one
Yeah.
front to
It
just
would. It probably would have cost $15,000 to hire people to make this video. That took. I mean, there was some amount of editing. Honestly, it wasn't 2 seconds to make it with AI. It
of
probably
course.
took me 30 minutes, including all the video editing I was doing. But literally, it took 30 minutes of my time to make something that, again, if you hired an agency, they would charge you thousands of dollars.
Very cool, very cool. Super interesting, right? I think I've got a fair understanding from all of this. I think would love to just lastly one question, right? I mean, touch base upon. say in an ideal world today where content is generally kind of created, and this question I'm asking honestly for maybe a personal shout out to what
Yeah.
we do at Pepper maybe, and I cannot not be honest with it, basically. But I mean, imagine it the world, right, where you've been playing with content for a while. You've worked with companies which have grown really large. I mean, Moveworks, Overjet, we've seen the growth. I know Moveworks really well from it's a Lightspeed portfolio company. We're a Lightspeed portfolio company again. So I've seen the growth very closely. But would love to get a sense broadly about what would an ideal content marketing stack look like for you?
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting and good question. And I wish I had a more concise answer for you because I really do think it depends on the company. And again, I think this is where, a lot of marketing folks struggle because what works at one company will not work for another company. What works in one industry will not work for another industry. And, I think for me, one of the challenges in my career, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but, I think it's important,
Please.
is, I think so many marketers take pride in their knowledge, right? I am a great marketer because I know X, Y, and Z about the world. And then if all of a sudden the thing that you think works, if X doesn't work, it feels like a threat to you, to your expertise, to your career. And, I had to go through this shift where I realized my skill and my ability to be a good marketer has less to do with my knowledge because what works is always changing and has more to do with my process, right? And the process stays the same. The process is always, how do we make things that matter to our audience, right? How do we create genuine value in the world? And, I think that really depends on the company, like I said. And so I go into every single role I have with an open mind. I start by listening and trying to understand what are these businesses' challenges, right? Maybe we have lots and lots of sales calls, and that's actually brand building is not as much of a focus for us as much as sort of later in the funnel objection handling is a focus. And we need to create
Right.
really targeted content with our existing customers to overcome those objections and prove value. Or maybe, everyone who uses the product absolutely loves it, but no one knows about us, and that's the opposite problem, right? And so I don't know that there is sort of a one size fits all formula for every company to adopt. I really think it's a matter of figuring out what are our specific challenges when it comes to marketing and specifically content marketing. What skills would it take for someone to have that they could overcome those challenges with us, right? And then really leaning on those people. So for me, I am not the foremost expert in SEO. And, even though I run our social media, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert necessarily on social media. Really, I think where I'm an expert is understanding the business challenge,
Hmm.
figuring out at a high level, how do we need our strategy to evolve to get there, right? How do we need to change our approach to marketing in order to reach this 3-year goal of being the world leader in dental AI or whatever the case may be? And then hiring the people who have the skills and the agencies who have the skills to help us get to that place. So I really think it starts with business challenges, frankly, as cliche as that sounds. And there isn't necessarily a one size fits all.
No, perfect. Yeah, I think this is really, really helpful. Thank you so much for this, Logan. I think it's been a fun chatting and getting more insights on how someone who grew really fast in his career, someone like you, right? For example, uh, you grew really fast and leading content teams now. Passion converted to profession. And the first thing I asked you, how did you land up over here? You told me I used to do this journalism thing back in college. So that's been really fun. But thank you so much for this. I think I'd want to kind of end on with a quick rapid fire that we have with everyone, right? And this is more to, so we saw Logan as a person, we saw Logan as a professional, and now we're seeing Logan as a, I don't know what you want to call, if a bathroom singer or a stand-up
Uh
comedian,
oh.
you can choose that. But
Should I get
I'm
my
gonna
lawyer
ask
before
you,
this?
yeah.
Should I get my lawyer before I answer these questions? I'm a little
Ah,
worried now.
you never know. I think post recording we'll figure that out. But I think I'm gonna shoot out like a few questions to you. You have 6 to 8 seconds to answer on those questions, right?
Sounds
But
good.
just feel free and tell whatever comes on the top of your mind, right? So okay, let's start. Loan, what is a favorite brand that you look up to who creates the best content in the world?
It's not a brand, but I'm going to say Mr. Beast for all the reasons I talked about.
Okay. What's your favorite comfort food?
Hard to beat a really good pepperoni pizza.
Uh-huh. Okay. You just moved to Hollywood, right? What's been the biggest life change that has happened?
Probably dodging all the influencers, I would say.
Uh-huh.
Trying to say hi to influencers in an elevator and getting the cold shoulder. That's always a little bit of a challenge to overcome.
Okay. What's a humble brag for you?
I feel like I'm kind of the man behind the curtain for a lot of things, right? And that's sort of the role of marketing. So, like I've written ads in the Wall Street Journal, I've ghostwritten articles in Forbes and Wired and all these places. And so I think, so much of the content that you've seen at the companies I've worked for, I've had my hands on. And,
Uh-huh.
it's not really something that marketers ever get to talk about. So I guess here is the right forum to brag about all that stuff.
Ah. That's like a full self publicity that's been brought out, right? So yeah, it's
Yeah,
humble brag. Yeah. Favorite actress.
I'm going to say Margot Robbie.
What's the best place in the world to live your life except for that in LA?
That is a great question. Well, part of the reason I'm really interested in remote roles, have been interested for the last couple of years, is I love working in Hawaii. And there's something about, you have to get up at 5 a.m. to take calls, and that's always a little bit of a challenge. But, if you're on the beach at 2, 3 p.m., just taking in the sun, hard to beat that. So I'm gonna go ahead and say Hawaii. And yeah, it's a lot of fun if you ever get the chance to work from Honolulu.
But
Yeah,
that's been a fantastic episode. Thank you so much, Logan, for being kind enough to kind of giving us for being like spending this time with us.
Yeah, likewise. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You ask really thoughtful questions, and I hope I got people started down a different journey of thinking about content and marketing. And a lot of my answers were sort of focused on high level strategy because I really do think that's where a lot of the opportunity is. Is just rethink at the very fundamental level. What are we even doing with content marketing? And really, my answer there is trying to provide value and making awesome content first, and thinking about what is the story we want to be telling later. I think that's secondary. So hope you learned something and very much enjoyed chatting with you today.
Yeah, perfect. Now I'll conclude this by saying again, Logan proves it to the fact, which is Pepper's motto. We say every company is a content company. Logan has explained almost maybe last hour or so on the same. But thank you so much, Logan. Been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon.